Yesterday, I was talking to my son about the power of words. Talking might be generous. I was giving him the full explanation. I was telling him about how words carry energy, how the language we use matters, how what we say can shape the way we think and feel. And I was really getting into it. Finally, he said, "Mom, I get it. But this is just a conversation. I'm just bantering with you." And I had to laugh because he was right. He wasn't asking for a lesson on the power of language. He was just having a conversation with his mother. And in that small moment, he made me notice something about myself. After spending so many years suppressing what I thought, holding things in, trying not to upset people, trying to say the right things the right way. I think there are times now when I've swung a little too far in the other direction. I found my voice. Now I'm learning how to use it. I don't think we talk enough about this part of personal growth. We talk a lot about letting go of the past. We talk about boundaries, finding our voice, becoming more confident, speaking our truth, stopping people pleasing. All of that matters. But what happens after you stop being the woman you were? What happens when you haven't quite figured who the new woman is yet? Because I think there's a period in between. You're no longer willing to live the way you used to, but the new way of being hasn't become natural yet. And that middle can be messy, but that's where we learn as well. Recently, I came across an online discussion that gave me pause. The person wrote about becoming a better person sometimes requires seeing the quiet ways we sabotage ourselves, the way we repeat unhealthy patterns, hurt people who care about us, or convince ourselves that we are completely innocent in every story. That last bit stayed with me, not because I believe we are responsible for everything that has happened to us. We're not. There are things that happen to us, especially when we're young, that we had absolutely no control over. But eventually, I think another question begins to appear. Not just what happened to me, but what did I learn to do because of what happened to me? And then maybe the hardest question of all, how has that affected the people around me? That question has been an uncomfortable one for me because understanding why I behaved in a certain way doesn't always mean the behavior was okay. I can understand why I became defensive. I can understand why I shut down. I can understand why I became angry or why there were times when I needed to be understood so badly that I probably stopped listening. I can have compassion for the woman who developed those patterns without pretending that everything she did was harmless. I think this is where personal growth becomes much more interesting because sometimes when we begin changing, we overcorrect. If you've spent most of your life saying yes when you wanted to say no, your first few no's might come out with a little extra force. If you've spent decades trying to keep everyone happy, you may suddenly reach a point where you don't want to accommodate anybody. If you've swallowed anger for years, finding your voice might not initially sound calm and beautifully assertive. It might sound like anger. If you've spent most of your life listening, you might suddenly discover that you have a lot to say. Apparently, in my case, sometimes that includes giving my son an unsolicited seminar where he was just trying to banter with me. I don't say that to make fun of the process. I think it's part of the process. We imagine change happening in this beautiful straight line. There is the old version of us, we do the work, and suddenly we become this confident, peaceful, perfectly boundaried woman who always knows exactly what to say. It doesn't work like that. At least it hasn't for me. Sometimes it looks more like this. You stop doing the old thing, and then you try something different. You overdo it. You notice. You adjust. You try again. You realize that isn't quite you either. And little by little, you find your way into something that feels more grounded, more like you. Maybe silence becomes speaking up. Speaking up becomes over explaining. Over explaining eventually becomes knowing when something needs to be said and when it can simply be left alone. Maybe people pleasing becomes rigid boundaries for a while. Then eventually, boundaries become something quieter. You don't need a big explanation. You simply know what works for you and what doesn't. Maybe always keeping the peace becomes arguing every point. Then one day you realize you don't need everyone to agree with you. You can have a voice without using it to prove something. That feels like a very different kind of freedom, and I'm still learning it. I'm still somewhere in this middle place. I have let go of a lot of the woman I used to be. Some of those old patterns simply don't fit anymore. But I also don't feel as though I've fully stepped into whoever I am becoming. And that's okay. Maybe there is something important about not rushing to create another identity. Because I spent so many years becoming versions of myself that made sense to other people. The good daughter, the accommodating wife, the woman who could handle things, the woman who didn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. I don't want to replace those roles with another rigid idea of who I now have to be. The empowered woman, the woman with perfect boundaries, the woman who always speaks her truth, the woman who has figured herself out. I haven't figured myself out. I'm unfolding. And I think the moments that teach me the most are often the ordinary ones. A conversation with my son, a moment when I hear myself over explaining like I did, a reaction that feels bigger than the situation, a time when I notice I'm trying very hard to make somebody understand my point. Those moments can become invitations, not to shame ourselves, not to decide, oh my goodness, I haven't changed at all, but to become curious. Why did I need to say so much just then? Why was being understood so important? Was I expressing myself, or was I trying to control how the other person saw me? Did this situation require a boundary, or was I protecting myself from something that wasn't happening anymore? Those are very different questions from what's wrong with me. And maybe that is what accountability begins to look like. Not punishment, not endlessly going back through our past looking for another thing to fix. Just becoming increasingly honest about what we bring into a room. There was another response in that online thread that said something along the lines of growth beginning when honesty becomes more important than self protection. I love that because self protection can be incredibly clever. It can make every reaction feel justified. It can tell us, well, this is just who I am now. I'm speaking my truth. Maybe. But sometimes speaking my truth can also become a very convenient way of avoiding the question of how that truth is being delivered. Sometimes a boundary really is necessary. Sometimes we're simply angry. Sometimes we're expressing ourselves. Sometimes we're lecturing our children about the energetic power of words when they just wanted to have a laugh with us. Growing means being able to tell the difference. Here's my question for you. Have you ever noticed yourself overreacting as you've changed? Maybe you finally learned to say no and suddenly realized you were saying no to almost everything. Maybe you found your voice and discovered that you were using it more loudly than you intended. Maybe you stopped trying to please everyone and then found yourself keeping people at a distance. Maybe you simply realized, as I did, that a new part of you is still learning how to exist. I'd love to know what that has looked like for you. I think a lot of us are living in this space. We are no longer the women we were. We're not entirely sure who we're becoming, and maybe the goal isn't to arrive at some finished version of ourselves. Maybe the work is now different. Instead of constantly asking, why am I like this? We begin asking, who do I want to be now that I can see this? What do I want to keep? What do I want to leave behind? What feels true now? And what is simply another reaction to an old way of living? I don't know exactly who I am unfolding into yet, but I think I'm beginning to trust the process a little more. And sometimes, apparently, that process includes learning when to stop talking and just banter with my son. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like and subscribe. Have a beautiful day from my heart to yours. Bye for now.